everyone, again to the Candice and Elisa show. We're really happy that you're watching. Today we're going to begin by addressing Mary Trump's new book, which you might have seen, Too Much and Never Enough: How My Family Created the World's Most Dangerous Man. And what we found quite interesting is that many of the points that she makes throughout this book is that anything in the Trump family that was considered a weakness was like an illness. Kindness, generosity, and all of these values that are upheld in society as something of value and something that should be nurtured were actually seen as something really negative. So by beginning with this, Candice, I was wondering if I could get your opinion on, the state of the world today and how these topics are applied really globally.
I mean, I think reading or listening to Mary Trump's story, it's very clear to see that anytime there's a lack of empathy within an individual, a society, it leads to havoc, right? And that's what we see. We see it in the tweets, we see it in the headlines, we see it almost every day in some form or another. There's some sort of it's almost like raising a toddler, like someone throwing their toys out the cart every 2 seconds, right? And so how I've actually began to look at America in some ways is as though, they are a toxic relationship. So I don't know if you've had these friends, because I have. I might have been this friend. But when someone is in a toxic relationship, right, and it always ends up being like this strange dynamic where all the friends can see that your relationship is not working. Like, girl,
yeah,
you need to
please
out,
leave.
right?
It's like, no, but you don't know him like I do.
If only you could see him through my eyes.
Yes, exactly. But he's really quite nice when we're together. It's just you can't. It's like the whole world is the countries. We're all looking in at this, going like, "What are you doing?"
Right, it's insane. And I think, I don't want to isolate America per se, but I think any leader who's had this much power and lacked empathy, we've seen it through history, what this leads to, right? We've seen it with Germany and Hitler, right? We see it is almost like something that I actually want to dive into about what is it that creates these people in history, whether it's your Hitlers, whether it's your Mugabes, whether, any dictator who ends up coming into power, because I think so many of us think, oh, we passed that era. We could never put another Hitler into power. We could never put another, Mugabe into power. Yet we find ourselves doing it. Yet we find ourselves drawn to these charismatic figures who almost speak to, I don't know if it's a savior, like we feel like we need to be saved, and almost their gregarious nature in some way makes us feel like they know what they're doing.
Well, and it's so hard to digest, as you said, as the person looking at the toxic relationship with Trump, right? It's like, you say charismatic, and initially maybe at some point, but I almost view this man and I don't even see charisma. I just feel disgusted, right? It's like I see him and I see lies. I see sexual assault. I see, denigration of women, racism, and, illegality, basically. It's like not paying taxes, not being transparent with business, completely, blatantly lying about statistics like the pandemic, I just go, the charisma is not even there anymore. What is it that makes us hold on to this figure that seemingly cannot do anything wrong? Like Mary Trump said, he's just enabled to continue doing whatever. And are we not picking up on it? Like, what's going on here?
What actually crossed my mind as you were speaking is the idea of when you have been raised in some sort of a crisis environment. So when I say crisis, I mean, whether it was trauma, whether it was a parent who was incredibly, strict on you, or whatever it was, it almost crafts you into someone where you do choose one of two paths. And it actually triggers a thought whereby when I was sitting with Eugene de Kock, for those of you who don't know, he's the man who murdered my father. And he has been referred to as everything in the book, prime evil, the embodiment of apartheid, everything. But what people don't seem to do very often is actually go into who this man is. And I see these similarities between Trump and Eugene in the sense that when I'm speaking to Eugene, the one thing that struck me very much was how he was raised. He was raised by a father who only showed affection when, he was acting and behaving in a certain way, which was a powerful way, a masculine way, a way that was in favor and in alignment with the views that his father held. And so when Eugene came out of his family, he wasn't just another cop. He wasn't just another guy in the police force. He became the best of the best, so much so that he was a decorated soldier within the apartheid government. He was, you know, one of the most celebrated figures in terms of, I think it was like, you know, I forgot what it was, but in Africa, where he was viewed as like, if you want the guy to get things done, Eugene's your guy. And so I look at Eugene, and he's this extreme example of, you know, what people perceive as this evil guy. And you look at Trump, and it almost, you know, the similarities are so stark, whereas Trump was controlled, or at least taught financially, that finance and money is power. Whereas Eugene, obviously, on the other side, was taught that, you know, Black people are evil and you've got to protect your country at all costs. And yet, these people don't only just get to a place in life where it's like, oh, you know, they're not disrupting humanity. They're just, you know, floating and maybe it being disruptive in the environment. They rise to the highest ranks of power.
Yeah.
And that is what gets me. Like, I sometimes wonder, do you need to have what Mary Trump actually referred to as the killer instinct to get to these high offices of power?
Well, yeah, and you know, you and I have tried to dissect this before, where we can't seem to find a leader that was just 100% good, the values that we conceive as good, namely being that they weren't also racist in liberating a country, or also abusive. Well, you know, and it's very hard, and it makes you go, actually, I think all of us, it's our human nature. There's no such thing as pure light and darkness, you know, pure, as we've referred to in other episodes. It's all operating in the gray zone. And you know, as Mary Trump said in her book, which I thought was quite interesting, is, can you blame him? And she doesn't blame him for becoming this, because when you've seen, as an insider like her, when someone is indoctrinated from, you know, being a baby, that kindness is weakness and generosity is evil, and that the only thing you can pursue at all costs, whether it's lying, where it's fake it till you make it, where it's whatever you got to do, is you have got to make it to that pinnacle of society, understood as finance and power. Can you blame him? And I would say the fact that that question is asks us, begs us to become empathetic to these creatures, these personas, right? And yet at the same time, we have to take it one step further and be able to say, though I empathize, I do not condone, and I will not be putting you into power. Because here it's, you know, it's still a democracy. People are being elected, and even though, yes, the electoral college is archaic and maybe that shouldn't be there, they're still getting elected, right? And, you know, why are these people rising? You know, how do we deal with this?
Well, and indoctrination is the word I was actually looking for when I was making the parallels between Trump and Eugene. And I think it is true, you know, and for me, I almost dare to play the devil's advocate in this situation, whereby I think to myself, you know, we don't have much control of our lives if we actually analyze it in, you know, in depth, and say, from the parents we're born to, we don't get to choose our names, right? This is something we've discussed prior. And then you get taught and bred and molded and constantly told in a certain environment that is confined from any other person or any other environment, that this is what's right, this is what's wrong. And this is told to you in your formative years, where our belief systems are structured, where our foundation and formation is really structured and rooted. And then you get into the world and everyone's like, what you believe is wrong, whatever, you know, whatever you're saying is wrong, but your family condones it. And your family says, but it's right. These are the people you trust and love and have adored your entire existence. And so I guess when people from the outside, it takes so much more strength for you to analyze objectively and say, maybe what people are saying is correct, right? And so it almost brings you to this point of saying, for me, the fascination came in where Mary was drawing parallels between Trump and his brother, who's Mary's father. And that her father was seen as kind and, you know, generous and giving and loving, you know, especially in his younger days, and an achiever in many ways. But he showed those emotions that were signs of weakness. And her father became an alcoholic, right? And he was discarded by the family.
He was cast out.
He was cast out. And so was she and her brother. And so you look at that and you think to yourself, do you, I mean, can you blame Trump in some ways? And can you blame the person he is? And because to me, it's like, there's almost, and I'm not a psychologist, but there's almost a obsessive quality to Trump's power. He loves being the center of attention. He loves being outrageous. I mean, this man will literally wake up in the morning and just tweet, you know, I hate this person. It's it's almost bizarre in nature, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think it's like we bring up alcoholism and looking at this from a different angle. Can you blame them? You know, my expectation would be you are raised a certain way. You are given an X amount of good and challenging, right? Some of us start from here, some of us start from there. Once you get to adult level, I would assume, or I would expect, that you can then make your own choices. And you can then, you know, now with having access to information, with having access to the internet, you know, the assumption was as soon as we have access to education and information and these things, somebody would go, I can actually address these issues within myself. But in order for someone to do that, there has to be that consciousness. And it's like they say with any addiction, like alcoholism or drug addiction, is like the battle is almost won when somebody goes, I have a problem that I need help for. And how do you, like you were saying, acknowledge or come to the conclusion that actually you need help or that something's wrong when your family environment, your nuclear core is condoning it, not just condoning it, but celebrating it? So then your question, can you blame this person? It's very, I mean, it's too hard to answer, right? It would require you having empathy and kindness and being able to connect with that humanity to see the pain that you're causing and the problems that you're causing. But if you can't connect with that because you've been indoctrinated not to, I mean,
brings me to, you know, some of the studies I've read by Dr. Amini, who's incredible. If you've ever dealt with narcissism or a narcissistic person, her videos, I'd highly recommend them. And she actually states, you know, very unequivocally that when someone, and I'm not saying Trump does, I'm not a psychologist, I can't diagnose him, but when you are dealing with someone with a narcissistic disorder, they cannot see themselves objectively. It is almost, you almost, it's like taking a horse to water. Like it will not drink, you know, no matter how much you try, push, navigate, and, you know, try and steer. And so it actually always brings me back to the idea of, you know, narcissists, excuse me, are created. They're not born. And so in certain environments, in certain family units, it shows you, and the reason I bring this up is that it shows us very clearly that formative year, that those formative years, those times of growing, those times in your family, those are really important years. And so when we look at people today and we say, you should make the decision, I mean, I completely agree with it. And from a logical standpoint, I'm like, logically speaking, you can see this is right, this is wrong, right? But I always have to go back to the fact that human beings aren't logical creatures. As much as we'd like to assume we are, as much as we'd like to say we're rational beings, we're not rational. And how do you test our rationality? Be in love, get into a relationship. You can all rationality out the window, right? Which is why.
Which draws us back to the toxic relationship in the States right now.
Right, and it brings us back to that because when you are the person intertwined in a relationship, it's very difficult to separate the person from the action because they become one thing. So to you, you are viewing someone from a very, you know, closed off perspective. And I think for people who do get to these positions, for someone like a Trump, to have to look outside of himself and say, this is not normal, this isn't great. When everyone around him, he surrounds himself with people who are like, you are amazing.
Yes.
And he
Enablers.
discards anyone who says otherwise. It's very difficult then to have a very, you know, clear perspective of your own life. And I think that's why that saying is so important of always surround yourself with people who are going to ground you. Because the more successful you become, the more yes people you get. And if you don't have anyone who pulls you back to earth and says, girl, your head is getting a little too big. Oh, no, that's not right. It's very hard to have a lot of perspective, right? Because think of it like in a celebrity situation where maybe like your Lady Gaga, Gaga leaves the house every day and people are literally falling at their feet. She's reducing people to tears. People are stopping her everywhere she goes. How are you grounded, right? How do you become grounded in that reality when everyone is showing you or treating you in a way that is more than human? And so I think when we come to terms with the fact that we are not rational beings, we don't operate from our mental and logical mind. We
have the capacity from rationale, but it's so often it's murky.
But when emotions come into play, rationality is the first thing to go out the window.
Out the window.
Right? Don't marry that man, girl. I'm gonna marry him, girl.
I mean, everything that you're saying makes me think of that recent Chris Wallace interview, which, you know, is everywhere now, where basically you see Trump, you know, being confronted, for example, with the pandemic statistics, where he adamantly keeps, you know, I'd say believing, but he keeps stating that the US is, you know, number one in how they've handled the pandemic, number one in the cases, and you even see him receive the statistics, and no matter what statistics he could have gone for, because there are some murkier statistics and other that put the US in different locations, but the point is, in no statistic to date is the US number one. And how he grabs the papers and on camera, live, goes, see, we're number one. And he firmly believes, it's like you're seeing someone operating in a capsule. It's like anything that doesn't match up with what's already in here, it does not compute. It does not register. It does not exist. Nobody believes it. It's a fallacy. And, you know, I would say in this particular instance, the ownership, the responsibility to hold this person accountable really boils down to all of us as society, nationally and internationally, to hold this person accountable by having conversations like this, by not condoning his behavior, both at the level that he's operating at, but also in our, you know, in our own social environments. We have to take steps where in our day-to-day life, we do not condone the behavior that he's exhibiting, and we don't stand for it, and we lead by example, because we each can do this. Even if we're not American citizens, even if we're not in the Trump family, we can say, I'm not going to condone it if someone says, you know, grab them by the pussy. If someone lies blatantly about statistics on camera, putting lives, you know, basically ignoring all the lives that are being lost, I will not stand for this. And having these conversations on a one-to-one basis, I think it's the trigger to change. You know, we just got to completely say, no more, enough, you know?
Yeah, and I think, you know, from what you've just said, you've just covered it perfectly. And I think that's where we should actually leave this episode, because we could go on for days about what's currently happening. And I think it is so important to call ourselves to order, to say, I may not be able to change the president of the United States, but I can change myself. And it's such a learning moment, because not only are we looking at Trump in particular, but we're dissecting human nature for the people in our lives who exhibit these qualities and traits, and no longer making excuses, but saying, I can empathize, but I've got to change this, that, or the other. And I think there's going to be a conversation we continue. There's going to be a series of conversations. I think Trump is someone we will continuously revisit, because he is an incredibly fascinating figure, whether you like him or hate him. He's someone who we can learn so much from, or at least learn what not to do. But thank you so much to everyone who's watched this episode. We look so forward to the next one, and we'll see you soon.
Take care.